I've got 5 different topics that I'm going to be talking about today. The 5 of them touch on different things that I've worked on or accomplished over the past year, and I've got some graphs and things that I want to show you about some of the ways that some of this stuff works and how it has worked out for me. And if you guys have questions, obviously feel free to follow up with me either at the end of the talk or at the conference going forward. So I'll be talking about social media, financial automation, content and SEO automation, and then also a little bit about personal development and overall health. So the first one is about Twitter automation. And I've actually gotten some comments recently and questions about how I've grown the Autoshark Twitter following from what it was before to, which was virtually nothing, up to about 1,600 to 1,700 Twitter followers in the past 6 to 8 months. So I'm going to talk about that first. And one of the first things that comes to mind is why would you even have a Twitter following? What good does it do for you? And really the idea behind having a Twitter following is that it helps expand your footprint. So if you're talking to people and you're getting them to follow your account, then you can tweet out to them and you can create personal interactions with people. So if you see somebody who follows your account and you can look at their profile a little bit, you can find out what sorts of industries they're in, specifically what they do, and you kind of backtrack a little bit. So if you're launching a product and you have people following your Twitter account, you can backtrack that and essentially do some customer development. And it's really, really helpful for that because people who follow you on Twitter tend to be, I'll say, much more, in some ways, social about it, but they are not necessarily reined in by, corporate politics. So, especially just people in general using Twitter. So you have these concentric circles. You've got the people who are following you, and then you've got people who you can kind of use as prospects, and then on the inner circle, you can look at some of those people as customers. Now, some people will start out as a customer, and then they kind of end up following you, but that's not necessarily always the case. But the idea is you really want to be able to build those concentric circles to help bring in an audience for your product. So this is what the Autoshark Twitter following looked like last year. So you can see in the bottom left, January of 2013 all the way up to August of 2013. It's probably not too different than most Twitter accounts that you see. If you go out there and you start following some people and trying to interact with people, this is generally what the graph usually looks like. So last August, and August is an important month, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but August I decided to do something a little bit different, and I started doing some experimentation to try and figure out how I can grow the Twitter following and what sorts of things that I can use for it. And this right here is kind of the result of that experiment. So what I did was I experimented for about a month or so between August and September, and I said, okay, well, what can I do to grow this Twitter following? And I totally blatantly ripped this off from Neil Patel, so I can't take credit for it, for this strategy. But it does work. And you can see that from August to September, I went from, 183 followers to 352. So I very nearly doubled it in 1 month. I don't have the exact dates, so it wasn't like I started on the 1st and ended on the 31st or anything like that. It was probably mid to late August when I started, and then probably somewhere in the middle of September that I ended it. And then I backed off for a month, kind of worked on other things, and then I came back to it, and I kind of put an automation process in place. And you can see kind of what the results of that are. It went from 371 in October to 844 in November, 1129 in December, and then 1447 in January. And then in February to March timeframe, I basically backed off of that. Partly to see what would happen, but also because I wanted to kind of focus on some other things that I was doing. So if you start taking a look at the numbers, on the far left side, what you'll see is the number of followers, monthly growth, and you can just look at the percentages. They're probably, as I said, the first 9 months of that year, first 8 months of that year are pretty similar to what you would probably see if you just created a Twitter account. And then for the next 6 to 8 months, what you see is a pretty massive growth rate on any time that I put some time and effort into it. So the question you have here is, what happened? What did I go about doing? And does it have to do with number of tweets you make? Does it have to do with retweets, anything like that? This is the number of tweets per month that the Autoshark account put out there. And you can see that there are some spikes here and there, but generally speaking, it's between about 160 a month and about 220, 230. There's 1 month where it's like 268, but not terribly common. So based on this graph, there's not really a correlation there. Next one is number of retweets. So is the content getting better? And if you look at this, until about November, it doesn't really spike, and then in December it backs down a little bit, and then it kind of continues back up. And I have some theories as to why some of that happened, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But you can see that the retweets aren't really relevant. And then you can see the number of mentions. Again, it's not really a huge correlation between what the number of followers is versus what the content is that I'm actually putting out there. So the key piece of this, though, is in order to build an audience on Twitter, the easiest way to do it that I found is to actually just follow people. Like, brutally follow people left and right. And it works really well. So for every 100 people you follow, you will gain roughly between 15 and 25 new followers. And what you can do is you can essentially put a process in place where you follow and unfollow people as they interact with you. So you follow 100 people a day, and then after 7 or 8 days, if they haven't followed you back, then you unfollow them and essentially move on to another group of 100 people. And there's easy ways to kind of automate this process a little bit. So here are some of the tools that I use to do that. The first one is Hootsuite, which Hootsuite is kind of immaterial. You can use pretty much anything you want, but I used Hootsuite just so that I could give access to all of my Twitter accounts to my assistant who lives in New York. And so she could basically manage sending out all the tweets and following up with people and thanking them and everything else. And then the next one is TweetAdder. TweetAdder, I'll talk about that in a minute. It's a one-time fee. It's $75 or so to buy the product, and you get to manage up to 5 Twitter accounts. And then the last one is Google Docs. So Google Docs, I use that more or less for collaboration with my assistant who manages all the interactions with the Twitter followers, and basically document the process for doing that so that if she ever leaves, then I can have somebody else pick that up, and there's a documented process of what to do, how to do it, etc. This is a screenshot of the TweetAdder interface, and in the top left, what you'll see is there's an area where it talks about following people. So you can create lists of people that you're going to follow back based on what sorts of things they're interested in. You can do searches, you can add them to a list, and essentially you can add them to this follow later list. And what that does is over on the right-hand side, and it's not on the right screen, but on the right-hand side, top right, you'll see where it says unfollow and then whitelist. If you're on the list of follow back later, or if somebody is on that list, that right there, that button will say follow. And you can just sit there and click on that button. And what it will do is just follow, whoever, every time you click the button, it follows a different person, and then that person kind of drops off. It's very quick, very easy to do. One thing you do have to be a little careful of is that when you're dealing with Twitter, you do have to follow their rules. So Twitter has some pretty strict policies around, not automatically following people. And if you do this too quickly, what will happen is it will look to Twitter like it's being done in an automated fashion. The reason TweetAdder works is because it is not automated. You are actually physically clicking a button to do each individual follow. So it's essentially getting around that. It's kind of like government policies. You're just kind of sidestepping it as soon as they change the rules. But like I said, it does work. And then down below, you've got this system where all these options are around unfollowing people. So when you unfollow somebody, what you can do is you essentially just wait. And I think this is the right screen. At the bottom there, it says hide users who were followed within the last 7 days. So you essentially give them time to follow you back. And if they're not interested, then you can essentially drop them and then go follow somebody else instead who might be interested. And it's not necessarily about specifically picking up customers. It's about finding people who are willing to interact with you and are interested in the types of things that you have to say. If they're not interested in the stuff that you have to say, it may very well be that you're not necessarily interested in the things that they're interested in. And if there's not a match, then there's not a match. It's not really that big a deal. So really what you're trying to do is you set up this repeatable process in place. So you've identified the people who you are interested in following. You do it by keywords. You can search. And you can do all of this inside of TweetAdder. It's very, very simple to do. You can identify basically heroes in whatever particular industry. So you can say, if it's security, you might say, I'm going to follow Bruce Schneier. And you follow him, and you can tell the software to go look at all of his users or all of his followers and add them to this list of people that you're going to follow. Because if they follow him, chances are good that they're interested in security. And if they are, then possibly they would be interested in the Autoshark account, for example, because it's related to security. So you set up these lists, and then you basically go through this process of following and unfollowing people on a fairly regular basis. As I said, you don't want to step over the bounds when you're looking at Twitter's policies. You do want to make sure that you are adhering to some general guidelines. So the first guideline is that you don't want to follow too many people all in one shot. You also don't want to unfollow too many people in one shot. Either one of those things, Twitter looks at that, frowns on it a little bit. What I've found is about 100 people per day seems to work pretty well. If you do the math on that, you can kind of backtrack to some of those graphs that I showed you earlier. And what you'll find is 100 people a day. As I said, it comes out to about somewhere between 15 and 25 new followers every single day. And then, that's how fast your Twitter following will grow. A couple of other things to keep in mind is that you do want to provide legitimate interactions with people. You do want to provide value to them. It's not just about gathering Twitter followers. It's not just about gaining notoriety for your Twitter account. You do want to interact with them, talk to them, make sure that you are providing value. The stream of information that essentially gets tweeted out from the Autoshark account right now, there's a list of security websites that I went to and basically put together a list and have my assistant go through those and look for interesting stories that are kind of relevant to the product. And if you're interested in that particular industry, I've got this list of stories that basically gets tweeted out. They're all news sites, and chances are really good that they probably would have missed those news sites anyway. So essentially, I'm providing them relevant information. The second thing is you also want to, as I said, you want to thank them for following you. I mean, it's not uncommon to at least have some form of interaction. You don't want to just ignore the people who are following you because realistically, you are kind of doing them a favor, or they are kind of doing you a favor. So if you execute this correctly, what happens is three things. And you'll see, let's see here, Dustin Koch. I'm Dustin. I work in the security field. I enjoy my friends, my laid-back style, and I'm looking for a job in the law enforcement field. So what you'll see is interactions like this, where you will go out and, as I said, you do want to provide legitimate interactions with people, not in an automated fashion. And what my assistant does is she actually goes out, and every time we get new followers, she goes out and literally hand writes it out and thanks several of them in one shot. It can probably be automated. We don't do that. But we do actually go out and thank people for following. So when you execute this right, though, what will happen is these people will come back and they'll favorite your tweet. Just by thanking them, they say, hey, I really like this. Thanks a lot for interacting with me. In addition to that, sometimes they retweet it. In this case, it got retweeted to 215 followers. I've had thank yous that have gotten retweeted to 40,000 people. And this is, again, from the same person. And then the third thing that will happen is that they'll actually respond back. They'll say, hey, thanks for finding me. So those are the three things that you can get out of executing this strategy. The next thing I'm going to talk about is automating your finances a little bit. One of the things that, as you run a business, being successful has its own challenges and its own problems. I own 3 different companies. I own Moon River Software, Moon River Consulting, and then I'm co-owner of the Micropreneur Academy, which is the backdrop for the Micropreneur Academy website and this conference. So my finances get a little hairy. And on any given month, I get tons and tons of bills and tons of paperwork. And at one point, I just decided, I really just don't like paying bills. And that's a direct quote. So I actually stopped doing it. I don't pay my bills anymore. They do get paid, I just don't do it. So what I did was I essentially set up an automation process where, how was I going to get myself out of this? Because they've got to be done. But do they need to be done by me? The answer is no. You don't want to be doing things that could be automated. Now, automation is not all about software. You can use human automation. This is basically outsourcing 101. So essentially, you just simply plan, execute, and review. So the first thing in planning is you decide what it is that needs to be done. And in this case, what I did was I decided, okay, well, I don't want to pay all these bills, but they've still got to be done. So let me take these, figure out how they need to be paid. And I essentially just listed them out in a Google Doc and shared it with my bookkeeper and said, these are the things that need to be done. Then I went through and I actually executed it a few times on my own to make sure that there weren't edge cases that I was missing. So I did this for a couple of months before I handed it off to her. And this process took me probably 6 months before I finalized everything and handed it off to her. But the reality is I haven't paid a business bill, with the exception of one, which was last month, in I think 3 months or so, 3 or 4 months. So basically she's handling everything. She has signing authority, which I'll get to in a minute. But she handles everything. And then the last thing, as I said, is the reviewing what's going on. So if you get through that process and you decide, hey, there's other things that need to be documented, there are other things that maybe I missed the first couple of times, you really want to approach it as if you're new to the business, you've never seen anything in there before, and is there anything missing from that documentation so you can hand it off? So some caveats or tips here. The first one is that you want to give authority to the people who are doing this. So whenever somebody works for you and is doing stuff, you want to give them the authority to do pretty much whatever they want or whatever they really need to do in order to make decisions for you. Because really what you're trying to do here is you're trying to extract yourself from the process and give somebody else the ability to make those decisions so that you don't have to. Whenever you have to make a decision, you become a bottleneck in your business. So by extracting yourself and giving them authority, then you don't have to do it. As I said, my bookkeeper has sign-in authority. If I wanted to write a check for the business, I actually can't because she's got the checkbooks. I could do it online, but that's kind of a pain in the neck because then I got to go add somebody and everything else. I just shoot her an email and say, hey, can you do this? So she takes care of that. The contractors that I have working for me, she pays them. I assume they're still getting paid. There's one person here, Eric. He could probably tell you whether he's still getting paid or not. I actually don't know. I don't look. Whoops. Give guidance. One of the things that I have set up is a standard operating document in Google Docs where I basically list out all these different procedures that I have, and then I have guiding principles and then a mission statement. The mission statement is kind of the grand plan for the business. The guiding principles say kind of what to do when. How do we operate the business? What do we do when a customer asks for a refund? How are we going to handle that? And it's pretty liberal, but what it does is it gives whoever's working for you kind of leeway to make decisions for you. So in addition to giving them the ability to do this stuff, you have to give them guidance for those exceptional situations that are not actually documented. And you also want to give them the ability to add to that documentation. So anyone who has access to the standard operating documents for Moonriver, they have the ability to go in and make changes to any of that stuff. So if there's any documentation that isn't right or needs to be deleted or removed or added, they can go ahead and do that. And they can do that without my permission, and that's perfectly acceptable. And in fact, I encourage that. And the last thing is, you want to give praise to these people because they really are helping you out. They are doing a lot of things for you that, quite frankly, you either shouldn't be doing or you don't need to be doing, or sometimes you just don't want to do it. But these people are helping you out, and it's very important to thank them for their contributions because otherwise, if they don't feel like their work is valued for the business and for you personally, then chances are they're going to kind of move on or they're going to do a subpar job. This is my super secret financial system at work. It's very advanced. Basically what I do is anytime I get a bill that I don't want to deal with, I just throw it in the box. And my wife drops it off to her once a week, and that's how we handle it. As I said, the Google Docs outlines exactly what to do for, you can probably see it if you get some of these bills. There's a Verizon bill, there's an AT&T bill, there's some junk mail. I just throw that in the box too, and that gets chucked. It's kind of nice. It gets chucked twice. But again, it doesn't need to be complicated. Again, this is about human automation. This is about making sure that work gets done that needs to get done and freeing your time up to work on the business rather than in it. And as I said, this saved me probably between 4 to 6 hours a month. And that's going to be on an ongoing basis. There's a lot of stuff that I don't do. So the next topic is on leveraging internal data for SEO. Last year, Breck Palumbo did a talk on public data sources that he used to expand the breadth of his website in order to gain some long-tail traffic. So what I did was I talked to him a little bit back in the fall and kind of asked him some questions about how he did it and what sorts of things he did. And I decided I was going to implement that and kind of see what happened. So I'm going to kind of present as a case study of what actually happens if you follow his advice. So it is kind of generic. It does work in additional situations, but I did want to kind of demonstrate that and highlight it. And this is not something that I've publicly shown in the past. This is the Autoshark website traffic. And you can see that there's two distinct places where the traffic goes up. And the first one is between August and September, and then it trails off a little bit. And then you'll see between December and kind of on to the current point, you'll see that the traffic just kind of rises up and to the right. And there's two different reasons for this, and I'll walk through both of them. The first one, when that first spike happened, you went from probably 800 to 900 visits a month to about 1,800. So basically doubled in 1 month. The reason for that is because I went out and I submitted Autoshark to a bunch of pre-launch email directories, or pre-launch email lists. And there's lists of websites that you can go to. I actually have a URL to it. This URL points over to Whitetail Software from Robert Graham. He's here as well. He mentioned to us we did a show where we talked briefly about this on the podcast, and he wrote into us and said, hey, I compiled a list. There's about 50 different websites on that list. And what we did was I talked to my assistant and said, hey, can you go out to all of these websites, and I need you to compile a spreadsheet. Take that spreadsheet, list all of the websites on the left, and across the top, I want you to put an X where they're asking for information, and tell me whatever the information is that they're asking. So she sent that back to me. She compiled all the information, and I looked through it. And some of these websites ask for things like, provide a 500-word description of your software or your website. Some of them say, I want a 2,000-word description. So essentially, you kind of have to massage the data a little bit. But at the end of the day, you probably are better served by doing that yourself and actually putting the information together. I handed that back to her, and then she went through and iterated through all these 50 websites and just submitted them. And as I said before, that kind of initial spike is kind of the result of that. And then it tapers off. Because obviously that's not really a scalable mechanism for scaling website traffic. So the next one is that after I implemented a tactic to go through and actually create content for my website, this comes from the Google tools. I forget exactly which one. I think it's the Google Webmaster tools, which tells you how many people or how many web pages on your website are indexed. And you'll see here that it was probably about 40 or 50 website pages up to about 661 on December 8th. So late November is kind of when we implemented this, put it out there, and then this is kind of the result of that. And you see that corresponds really, really well with when website traffic really started to kind of take a turn upwards. So here's some pictures, screenshots from what we built. On the top left, you'll see there's some Visual Studio solution files where there's one called generate content on build server. And essentially what that does is just goes in the database, sucks out a lot of the information that we've built to ship with the product, and then it generates all of these content pages. And those content pages are put in a specific directory, and then they're linked to dynamically from another project. So that way we run one project to build the content, then we run the second one to incorporate that content into the compiled website, and then we push it out to the web server. On the right-hand side, you'll see just a screenshot of kind of what some of one of those pages looks like at a high level. So we have all these different policies. So if you have Windows 2012 server or a Red Hat server or Debian or CentOS, et cetera, those have their own policies. So for each of these policies, we have a dedicated set of web pages that are associated with that. And then they're all linked back and forth, so we've got some cross-linking in there as well. In the top left, you can see where there's some category links, and then just to the right of it a little bit, where it says Basic Windows 2008 Server Policy. That lists all of the individual things that we're looking at. So for example, there's one for disabling the guest account, maximum password age, minimum password age, account lockout duration, et cetera. Now, with these, we're essentially targeting the long tail keywords that nobody in their right mind is going to go out and create a web page called disabled guest account. What's the point in that? But when people go search for that, what are they going to find? And they're going to end up finding this. So you go out there, and what I did was I basically it's just SEO 101. And right here, the disabled guest account, that's an H1 tag. And then on there, you also have to make sure that you are providing relevant content, because you don't want your bounce rate to go too high. If your bounce rate goes too high, Google's going to start penalizing you for basically poor content on your website. And that process will take a little while, but what you'll find is that your website traffic will dive a little bit. So we did some iterations on this to try and figure out, well, how can we kind of improve that? And this is what we ended up coming up with, because in each of these policies, there's all these different rules that run, and it's like, okay, well, what does this rule do? Why would you use it? And how do you remediate it? How do you check for it? And these are all the things that we added in there. So we added how to validate it, what are the acceptable values, what are the remediation steps, and then we cross-linked it and said, okay, you can go from one to the next. So that way, all of the links on the pages are not at the bottom of the tree. They basically, all those bottom leaf nodes connect to one another. So that way, when Google's spidering it, they'll look at it and they say, oh, well, yeah, this is not just one random end page that people are using to gather traffic. Here's a list also from Google. You can see here all of the pages. Maybe it's a little bit hard to read. There's a ton of pages that start with control point content /CP and then just a random string of numbers. Those are actually the page names. So in some cases, like for extremely long keyword traffic, long tail keyword traffic, the page name doesn't necessarily matter as much. So I don't have a page called Disable Guest Account, but it is in the title. So if it's long tail enough, Google doesn't care because nobody else is really targeting it. And you can see that some of the average positions of these, some of them are not very good, but some of them are 3, 4, 5. On this front page, you'll see one that's like 11. But it also tells you the number of impressions, clicks, click-through rate, et cetera. So those are the types of things that you can use to essentially iterate on this to make that process better over time. So if you have any sort of internal database of information that you have for your product, or you're using, as Breck was using public data sources, you can essentially massage that data to help target some of these long-tail keywords. And as I said, that will bring in a heck of a lot of traffic. I mean, it's probably quadruple traffic in about 4 or 5 months for the website. So my next section is on personal development, and we're going to talk a little bit about increasing your productivity. How many people here would like to increase their productivity? Pretty simple question. I also made the mistake once of asking people if they were just interested in security of their servers for Autoshark, so it can be a little too generic sometimes. But why is it you guys would like to increase your productivity? 2, 3 answers? Call them out. More stuff in a day? More free time? More efficient? Okay. Say that again? Do things that bring back better rewards. I mean, all these are great reasons to look at that. What I did was I started looking around and I said, okay, well, how can I increase my productivity? And what I realized was that I've used a couple of different apps. I've kind of settled on focus time right now. I've used Pomodoro and a few others. And I've kind of settled on focus time because I look at that and I say, oh, okay, well, I can put something in and I can work really hard on it for 20, 25 minutes, and then I take a break for a little while, and it works reasonably well. But you look around on the internet and say, okay, well, how can I increase my productivity? I want to work less so that I still want to be able to get more done. And you just do quick searches and you'll find books like these. Work less, do more. I'm not going to recommend this book. I've never actually even opened the cover. It was just an example that I wanted to show that there are books out there like this. There are also other books that you're probably much more familiar with, like The 4-Hour Workweek. How many people have read this? How many people like it? Fewer hands. Interesting. So I looked at this and I said, well, it's an interesting concept to have like a 4-hour work week. And I kind of thought a little bit about it and I said, well, how can I switch this on its head? How can I flip it over a little bit and look at it in a different way? Because the 4-hour work week, I don't want to say it's too abstract for me, but I think it gives a false impression of, you hire people and they do all the work and you just kind of sit back and reap the rewards. And let's be honest, it just does not work that way. So one of the things I looked at and says, well, if you're trying to work less, why would you do that? How would it work? And what sorts of things can it actually do for you? And the question I asked myself is, what if you only had 4 hours each week to actually get all of your work done? And what I realized was that when you start working less hours, you actually become more productive if you are conscious about working less hours. And the reason is because you become more productive because you start trying to squeeze more time into a shorter time period. So let's say that on any given day, instead of working 8 hours, you work 4. And you know that you only have 4 hours to get that stuff done. Well, what happens is you stop looking at Reddit, you stop looking at Facebook, you stop looking at all these news sites because you don't have the time anymore to spend. So you're essentially compressing that 8-hour workday, most of which is probably fluff anyway, into a 4-hour workday. And that's how when you start looking at some people who are out there in the industry who are doing extremely well for themselves, and you're saying, well, heck, how is he only working 2 days a week or 3 days a week? Or how is it that he only works from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and is able to get all this stuff done? That's exactly why. It's because they are getting more stuff done, because they have compressed that workday and they know that they don't have the time to spend. They can't go out to Facebook because it's going to waste their time that they do have. That's the corollary to that is work expands so as to fill available time for its completion. Has anyone ever done consulting work in here? Anyone ever have a 10-week project that could have used less time? Like consistently? The fact is most of these projects could probably use a lot less time. But the fact is if you allot 10 weeks for it, you're going to use 10 weeks. If you allot 12, you're going to use 12. If you allot 4, you're going to use 4. And once you start butting up against that, nobody goes back and says, well, we'd like you to pay us for less time because we're not going to use that. That just doesn't happen. So the issue is that how far can you take this, though? Are you going to be able to say, okay, well, I've got this 2-week project, and I'm going to give myself 2 days for it? And the problem is it does break down after a while. But there are corollaries for that where it does work extremely well when you start limiting things. Now, if you look at something like this is the MicroConf Europe website when we started selling tickets, and you'll see right here that there's 4 tickets remaining. Do you think there's anybody who's going to put that off? There are people who I've talked to who looked at MicroConf and they're like, well, I'll think about it, and they see the tickets come available. And then you see something like this, and your impetus to move on that and make a decision right then and there is much, much higher. There's lots of research out there that shows that if you take a bunch of students and you give them a 2-week project, they're going to take 2 weeks. If you give them 2 days, they'll take 2 days, but they're going to hate you for it. But they will probably get it done. When you start compressing that time, it makes it much more, I'll say, motivational to actually get those things done. And it will help your productivity. So as I said, though, limiting the time you have to do something will increase productivity, but its effects are limited. You can't always take a 2-week project and drop it down to 2 days or 3 days. You do have to be conscious of how long it will actually take to do something, but by cutting hours intentionally, it will help you out in terms of productivity, which does free you up for other things. And not necessarily work things. Freedom, as Heaton was talking a little bit about, it can free you up to essentially, just be happier in life because you get to enjoy your free time and live your life instead of kind of suffering through it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about personal fulfillment as well. And this kind of goes back a little bit to productivity. I'll kind of draw those a little bit together. One of the things that you can do if you're not really sure what sorts of things you like to do, one of the things that you can do is you kind of look at the things that you're good at. So one of the things that I think Rob and I have done this on the podcast before is we took the Strengths Finder and did an entire podcast episode on it. And you'll see here that I think my strengths are strategic, focus, analytical, competition, and command. And when you take this, there's I have a URL there, it goes out to Amazon, and it's, I think, $14 or $15 for the book, and they give you a code inside of it. You go to their website, and you take this test, and it will essentially walk you through and ask you a bunch of questions, and afterwards, it will give you almost an ebook that tells you these are the top 5 themes in your life, and these are explanations of it, and here are some inspirational quotes that might kind of motivate you. I think that kind of helping out with personal fulfillment, you kind of need to understand who you are and what sorts of things you like. Another one that I got involved with was the Lumina Spark, which was given to all the members at the Business of Software conference this past year. And you'll see that there's several people here, they're probably looking at this saying, wow, is he weird? Because I actually asked the presenter, Paul Kenny, about this because I said, well, I'm not terribly extroverted, but I'm pretty balanced overall. And he's like, wow, you're weird. Most people are not like this. Apparently, the vast majority of people are skewed in a couple of different directions. The one that I'm not is extroverted. I'm not the type of person to be, the center of attention. I don't necessarily want to be. I'm okay being in a big group of people where I'm just talking to them, kind of sharing my opinions, but being the center of attention for me is not necessarily what my goals are. It's not really my focus in life, and it's, being up here as a speaker is a little different. But what I did was I talked to John Knox from Evernote when I was at the Business Software, and he had Google Glass. So I said, well, what's the most interesting thing or surprising thing that you've found out about yourself or about Google Glass and wearing it? And he said that he talks to a lot more people, which is interesting because you think about it, and Google Glass is like, oh, it's a technology. You get to check your email. You get to browse the web. It's right there. I have it, and I actually have it with me if somebody wants to take a look at it later. But, I kind of be the center of attention at the moment, so I'm not wearing it. But I got it primarily because I wanted to kind of expand my focus a little bit and go in areas that I was not necessarily comfortable with. And one of those areas is being a little bit more extroverted. And I have found that by wearing it around, people do talk to me more. They're like, hey, what is that? And they instantly want to talk about it. They're conversations that I never would have had otherwise. So, as I said, understanding who you are and pushing your boundaries into other areas essentially helps with personal growth. And I thought, what's the worst that could happen? think that did happen to me once in school. But the reality is, when you start doing new things, you have to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? If I email this person to ask them, hey, what do you think of my website? What's the worst that's going to happen? They just say no, or they just don't answer. Is that really a big deal? And the answer is no, it's not. But when you're in business, you're running your business, there's lots of things that you're doing that are extremely scary. They're all new things to you because you've never done them before, and you're not really sure what you're doing or how it's going to be taken. So you kind of have to push your own boundaries to become comfortable being uncomfortable, because once you put yourself in that position, it helps build on your successes. It helps you become comfortable with those positions, and the more that you do them, the more comfortable you become with them. So there's a lot of benefits to trying new things. It does build your confidence. It does build your courage. Cures boredom. I found that just looking into different things that I might have been mildly interested in before, it does take my mind off of work, for example. So, these are a bunch of different things that will help you, and it does increase your productivity, and part of that relates back to curing boredom. So if you think too much about work, and you're always thinking about it, it's always in the back of your mind. And as entrepreneurs, I think that a lot of us are always thinking about, okay, well, I got my day job, and now I've got to go home, I've got to work on the code, and I've got to do some of this marketing stuff. And then you lay in bed, and you're sitting there thinking about all that stuff for like the next 2 hours. And you just don't get to sleep because you've been thinking about that stuff. Whereas if you take a break from it, and you intentionally take those breaks, and knowing that these are the results of those breaks, then it will definitely help you move the business forward. Last thing I want to talk about is personal health. So there's essentially 3 pillars of personal health. And these are no surprise to anybody. Anyone who's been to any given health class in high school is going to know what these are. There's sleep, exercise, and eating habits. If you have poor sleep, there's a bunch of problems associated with it: exercise, eating habits, etc. How many people in here get 7 to 8 hours of sleep on a very regular basis? More than I expected. How about exercise? 2.5 hours a week plus muscle training? A lot more hands down. Eating habits, 1,600 to 2,500 calories a day. Yes. Now, put your hand up if you focus on all 3 of these and you actually do all of them. A few hands, not nearly as many. The problem is that when you focus on one of these 3 things, but not all 3 of them, or if you focus on 2 of them, what happens is those problems bleed over. So, for example, if you're not sleeping well, it has a tendency to cause increased BMI, mainly because you're not sleeping well. Your levels of cortisol increase, and you're hungrier because you've been up for longer, and so you tend to eat more. And then with exercise, same thing. Eating, same thing. I mean, these things bleed into one another. So if you're not actually doing all 3 of them, they can really negatively impact your life in a lot of different ways. And I don't think that many of them are terribly obvious either. Mainly because we don't necessarily have graphs and charts and stuff that show you, oh, your productivity is here, but if you do these 3 things, then your productivity will be up here. Because it's very hard to measure. Because they usually take these generic statistics, and they do them across a large number of people, and there's all this variability. And you may have done them yourself, but tracking some of that stuff and tracking the actual metrics associated with that can be very difficult. So a lot of what happens is that you end up with a lot of increased stress in your life. So you'll have things like, an increased workload. You've got to take care of your family, and especially as entrepreneurs, I mean, these are really high priorities for most people. As an entrepreneur, you're building a business. People have certain expectations. Oh, you own your own business. How are things going with that? And they expect you to do really well because they have these high expectations for you. I'll give you an example. My neighbors stopped me the other day, and they're like, hey, have you heard about this new company? I think it's called Giggle. And I'm like, you mean Google? Yeah, that's it. Those guys made like $1 billion. I'm suddenly, in the realm of Google because I told them that I work with software. So they have these lofty expectations for me, and they're wondering why I drive a Honda. You do get stressed out in terms of, from paying attention to some of your competition. Lack of closure, really what lack of closure amounts to is that a lot of the things that you're doing, you're sending out emails to people, you're trying to make introductions, do networking, talk to people, and you're not getting a response. You're trying to close deals with trial customers, they don't talk to you. And this lack of closure actually contributes to higher stress levels. So this kind of goes back to if you're suffering from these things, which pretty much everybody in this room has suffered from lack of closure for some customers because they're just not talking to you. it does affect your brain. It does affect your body and your stress levels and everything else. What are some of the symptoms of this? So the symptoms, there's a lot of them. And there's too many to actually list. I'm not going to bother. But you'll see things like low energy and insomnia and difficulty relaxing and shutting off your brain, inability to focus. I mean, some of these things, you look back at the effects of not exercising, not getting enough sleep at night, they overlap. And there's a very good reason they overlap, is because they're essentially the same thing. You're too stressed out, your cortisol levels go up, so your body is just starting to react negatively to the stress that you're putting it under. There's typically a lot of stress associated. People think, fight or flight response. You've got adrenaline that rushes in, helps you, flee danger and things like that. Well, trying to fight through that with your brain, it actually hurts you because you have to deal with that at some point. How many people have ever experienced, probably 2 or 3 of these symptoms? I'm guessing just about everybody. Stress is something that actually can be pretty serious. So some of the things that you can do to alleviate that is that, for example, what I did was I actually set aside different times for evenings and weekends. So I actually backed off. If you have the ability to back off from that stuff, stop it, especially if you're working full-time on your business. If you're able to essentially put stuff down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and just walk away, as I said before, when you limit your hours, you increase your productivity. And part of the reason you increase your productivity is because you're reducing your stress. You don't have to worry about it until you come back. And then when you come back, you have this dedicated time, your productivity is increased. So limiting your hours will actually help with that. Scheduling, one of the things I started implementing is, excepting this week, of course, at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, I just stop whatever it is I'm doing and start getting ready for bed. I know I won't go to bed for another probably half hour, 45 minutes, but that's okay. I mean, it's the system that I put in place because statistics and studies show that people make bad decisions when they're stressed out and they've been working too hard. There was a psychological story that was done, a study that was done, where they took a bunch of people and they split tested them and they said, okay, this group of people over here, we want you guys to remember these 3 numbers. We're going to test you on them for the next 4 hours. They took another group of people and they said, we're going to have you remember these 7 numbers in a row, and we're going to test you for the next 4 hours. So they tried all these different numbers, said, thank you very much, here's a check for your time, and go out, you can get your check out front, and by the way, there's some snacks over by the, by the door on your way out. Like typical behavioral analysts, the whole thing was, of course, a sham, and it had nothing to do with any of the numbers. What they wanted to know is which snack were they going to pick on their way out the door. The people who had to only remember a couple of numbers were kind of pitted against the people who had to remember a lot of them. And the people who had to remember 7 numbers were 5 to 10 times more likely to choose an unhealthy snack. And part of that is because they start making bad choices because their mental energies, their mental stores are drained because they've been working so hard. That's why people sit in front of the TV at night and sit there snacking on chips and popcorn and soda and things like that while they're vegging out in front of the TV, because they're trying to relax, but they don't have the willpower in order to stop themselves from eating that stuff because they just can't. They've been working too hard. They haven't taken the time to kind of decompress from work. Last one is healthy eating. You have to make an effort to, eat what you're supposed to be doing, at certain times of the day. So that means no midnight snacks, no Del Taco runs, as much as Heaton will hate me for that. But those things all, they end up being very bad things for your body and for your brain ultimately, because a lot of these things boil down to, these strategies boil down to 3 basic concepts. And the first concept is that they help your brain and body function the way that they're supposed to function. The second one is that they essentially reduce stress. So by focusing on these strategies, they reduce your stress levels, and you're able to get more things done. And the last one, which is probably the most important thing, is they essentially balance out the hormones and chemicals in your body so that you can pay attention and do the things that you want to do and put your brain in control of your body. Because that's a very, very difficult thing to overcome, is when your body wants one thing. Your body wants cookies, and your brain says, no, that's a bad idea, but you eat the cookies anyway. You can't stop. It's not a matter of willpower, it's a matter of the chemicals that are in your body saying, I want cookies. So there's a whole slew of things that come out of having, too many hormones in your body. Cortisol is obviously one of them. I can't read from here. Insulin shock, that's probably the one that most people are familiar with, and then another one is kidney stones. Those are both direct results of having too many of specific hormones in your body. And then there's corollaries for not having enough. And the two that most people are probably familiar with are insulin deficiency, so diabetes, and then, I can't even pronounce this, unicoidism, low testosterone. So these two things are probably things that most people are familiar with. And even Tim Ferriss has probably brought that one to the forefront, because in his 4-Hour Body book, he actually has this entire section on how to increase your testosterone. And if you look on his website, he's got a cheat sheet for how he essentially raised his testosterone levels from medically low to something like 800 or 900 or something like that. It was something ridiculously high. And again, testosterone is just a hormone in your body, just like anything else, whether it's sugar, insulin, testosterone, estrogen. There's all these different chemicals in your body, and your body has to operate within like certain tolerances. And when your body gets out of whack, then it starts affecting you. It starts affecting your ability to get things done. It starts affecting your focus, your sleep patterns, your weight, everything else. So unless you're operating within those tolerances, it can really be shooting yourself in the foot. So let's just take as an example of this. One of the ones is testosterone. And I use that partially because Tim Ferriss has put that out there in his book, and as I said, he's got some pretty good stuff in there. The one I want to point out right down here is for men, it's supposed to be between 270 and 1070, something like that. And for women, it's supposed to be between 15 to about 70. So these are average ranges. And if you look at some of the symptoms, these are some of the symptoms of that. I think I've seen this before. There's other ones as well. The other ones are probably much more familiar to people that people have heard about. You hear things like low testosterone and loss of libido and hair loss, diabetes, things like that. Those are the ones that probably people are much more familiar with. But a lot of these things overlap with your general basic health. And part of that is because of the cortisol that can impact your ability to make good decisions during the day, your stress levels, et cetera. So to kind of dig into that a little bit further, I want to point out two different things here. Here's an example of a common problem. This is from a study from 1996, where it shows you over time decreasing testosterone levels in men, and it shows you like what the standard deviations are. So you'll see that for somebody 35, 45 range, it should be around 600 to 700, something along those lines. And for the standard deviation, that's generally what it looks like. I couldn't actually get Excel to do this for me. It was kind of a pain in the neck, so I couldn't actually graph those for you very well. But the problem is that some of the times, lifestyle adjustments just simply don't work. This is Gregg. Gregg was a speaker at the Business of Software conference this past year, and Gregg did an extremely good talk. I would highly recommend taking down that URL right there and go watch his video. It's about half an hour long. It's a very good talk on developers and depression. One of the things that he points out is that Gregg has bipolar and ADHD. And essentially both of these things are a result of having a chemical imbalance in his body. His hormones are basically screwed up, and there's nothing he can do about it because there's certain organs that are just not functioning properly. And in order to fix it, he basically has to go on medication in order to help straighten those things out. But without that medication, he simply wouldn't really be able to function. I want to go back to this graph just really quickly, and I want to point out that 600 to 700 number right there. And I also want to point out this one. So remember how before I talked about this August time frame where I started doing a lot of different things? And that was about the time that I was actually diagnosed with low testosterone. And I think it's very rare to be able to take a look at hormone studies or something like that where you have solid numbers of productivity from before and after for very specific people. So I did want to share some of this stuff with you. But that 376 number right there, it says for 85 to 100-year-old men, it was 376. And the standard deviation is 134. Mine clocked in at about 211. So scary question here. If you're over 30 and male, raise your hand. Leave them up, and pick a number between 1 and 4, inclusive of both numbers in your head. Put your hand down if it is not number 3. 1 in 4 men are affected by it. And of those, only about 10% are actually treated. So that's actually a very serious issue. And when you start looking at that stuff, it can become very scary, especially, and it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman because, they know each other, usually. And that can affect your ability to get things done. So remember I pointed back to August. And when you get these things taken care of, when you start getting your hormone balances in check, you start seeing productivity gains like that, and like this, and like that. This is something that's probably been going on for a very, very long time for me, not something I knew about. But I think everybody really thinks about these health consequences of not exercising, not eating, and you know what they are, but you don't necessarily have hard data to look at when you start looking at this stuff and say, okay, well, if I do this stuff, what's actually going to happen? So by getting those things in check, it can actually help your productivity and get you through some of this stuff. A couple years ago, I think it was here at MicroConf, Jason Cohen came out and gave a talk, and one of his points was that family is really why a lot of people here at MicroConf, because you're not here to make money. I mean, you are, but it's not necessarily because you want giant gobs of money. It's because you want to make a living for yourself. You want to support your family. You want to be able to do good things for the people around you. You want to talk to your customers and help them out, and everything else. And what Jason said was the only reason people who speak put pictures of their kids is so that they can exclaim to the world that they're not a virgin. It's the only reason why people put pictures of their kids in these slides. But the fact of the matter is, those are the types of people why we do these things. They are the reason why we're here, why we're doing the stuff that we're doing. Is because we want to be able to spend more time with them. And if we're not enjoying that time, then really what's the point? The issue is that if you're not taking care of yourself, nobody else will. Nobody else can really force you to go to the gym or eat better or make changes in your life. And if you're not helping yourself, how do you expect to help anyone else? Thank you very much.
Could you talk about a little bit more about the Spark Mandala, the source, where you heard that, where I can get more information about that? I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, so if you search for Lumina Spark, it's Lumina. There's a company, I think the name of the company is called Lumina. It's called a Spark Mandela. And essentially what it is you go through this profile personality test. They ask you a ton of different questions. And at the end of it, they give you, I forget, it was like a 30 or 40 page report that tells you kind of where in that color spectrum you lie in terms of whether you're extroverted or a people person or aggressive and all these different things. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure that they sell it commercially, but I think that if you talk to them and just say, hey, I was at a conference, I heard this, I don't know whether they sell it to individuals or not, but you may be able to just buy it from their website. I haven't really looked at it because, like I said, I got it for free.
So does Twitter actually help us in finding customers who would actually convert? I mean, in your experience, have you seen that?
I get a fair amount of traffic back to my website from Twitter. I don't find that it converts very well, but what I do find is that it opens the door for conversations. So if I go look at somebody's profile and I see they're in the security industry or they do penetration testing, for example, I know what industry they're in, and I can probably ask them, I could start a dialogue with them and then ask them for like an introduction to somebody, at their business. It's kind of similar to LinkedIn where you can, you talk to people. Obviously, you want to see if you can get those direct messages. You don't want to unfollow people who have followed you because you want to maintain those relationships. But it does give you the ability to essentially walk up to their door and knock on it and say, hey, by the way, can I talk to you about something? I just want to, can we chat for a few minutes? I'd be really interested to hear your opinion on something. And by couching it like that, you are able to open the door in such a way that's not salesy. And that helps you start that discussion so that if later on down the road it does lead to a sale, then great. But it is high touch. So it's not something that would probably scale very well. But if you are kind of in the early stages or still trying to find your target market and understand what customers are truly interested in paying for, it will help you in that regard.
I just had a quick tip on the sleep thing. I struggled a lot with I'm like you. I go to bed at like 10 o'clock now, but I struggled a lot with it before. And one thing I learned is, like a lot of people here, I do everything on my computer. I read, I watch movies, and all that. And the light from your computer kind of tricks your body into staying up later than you should. And there's an application called Flux, which maybe you guys all know about it already. But it's helped me a lot. It basically dims your computer, so it's like you're using a candlelight instead of a fluorescent light in your face.
Yeah, if anyone didn't hear that, the application is called Flex. It's for the Mac, I believe. I personally don't use it. I've tried it. What I found was that just turning off my electronics at like 7 or 8 o'clock is a much better option because I hate having the screen just dim on me. And I just like squinting at it. That's why I got laser surgery, so I see better.
I have a question about your content strategy. You said that you automatically create some content from some documentation, but is this documentation that you have created for your product, or it's Microsoft documentation? What's the source of that?
The source is a database. So Eric Kenny, who's running around here, if you talk to him, he could probably give you some insight about the policies themselves and how they're built and what sorts of things go into that process. So essentially what we're doing is we're pulling data from external sources, like publicly available stuff. We're putting it into our own database because we need to be able to format that in such a way that it feeds into the Autoshark engine. Because it's basically in some ways a scripting language, and it's basically a lot of key value pairs, and then it gets fed into our engine. The engine executes it, but what we do is we take that information, pull it out of a database, and then format it into an HTML content that we put out on the website.
When you have a business with a low complexity domain, so you don't have like naturally a way to have 500 pages on really interesting topics that people actually Google for, what are some strategies to identify what you should have long tail content on?
I would definitely look at Google Webmaster tools and see what they're telling you in terms of like related keywords and recommendations. If you don't have any long tail stuff, I'm not sure what I would recommend.
Hit tail.
Yeah. I didn't want to be overly obvious about that recommendation, but
Longtail Pro as well is actually a very good tool.
Hittail does give a lot of good keywords. I think when Rob switched it over to interacting directly with Webmaster tools, I got something like 85 or 95 new keywords that hadn't shown up before, and it does rank them with like 5 stars if they're very good. Even down to 3 stars is pretty good, and you can just request articles directly out of there.
Talking about automating your finances and having somebody else handle paying the bills, what system do you have in place so that you stay aware of how much money you're spending and if things have gone awry from a particular vendor that you're buying from and things like that? What system do you have in place for you to stay on top of things?
So this past year I migrated all of my accounting stuff from, I had Moonriver Consulting books in QuickBooks, which was a desktop app. I didn't have it in their online thing because both of them suck. And then Moonriver Software, I had it in Less Accounting, and then I moved that into Xero. So I basically moved both of them into Xero at this point. And because of the way that I can just toggle between them, it's the same system. I can pull the same reports. So depending on the business, I can separate expenses and customize my reports to kind of see where the money is going and what I'm spending on a monthly basis. That helps a lot. Also, the other thing that helps is I really only have one credit card for each business. I have like the debit cards and stuff, but I just have an American Express Platinum for my consulting business, and I have an American Express Gold card for my software business. And every month I see the bills come in, which this month is very skewed because of MicroConf, so it's like tens of thousands of dollars. But so I would have to dig in order to find information. But generally speaking, from month to month, I know what those expenses are just because I'm kind of looking at them on a monthly basis.
Quick question on the testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
Did you just get a test through your doctor? Did you order a lab online? And then do you take supplements? Is that how it works?
Mm-hmm. Yes, good question. So there's 2 different ways to get the test done. There's one you can buy off Amazon. It's about $30 to $35. Depending on which lab you get your test done at. That one's a saliva test. It is not nearly as accurate, and depending on which lab it goes to, it cannot be as accurate as well. The most efficient way or the most accurate way is to have a blood test done. So you can have it done probably at your doctor or at your urologist. Either one would do it. When they get those test results back, they can take a look at them and see kind of where on the spectrum you stand. And if you've got stress, for example, that will drop your testosterone levels. If you, let's let's see here. There's lots of things that do it. If you're not getting enough zinc, that affects your testosterone production. If you're not getting enough selenium, that affects production. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you get less than 5 hours of sleep for 5 days, that'll drop your testosterone by 15% right off the bat. There's a lot of things that, and that's significant. I mean, if you talk about, oh, well, you know, I'm at 500 normally, and 15% or 20%, it can go up as high as 20% if you're not getting enough sleep. 20% drops you from 500 to 400, and you can immediately take 20% off of your productivity. In terms of treatment, there's a lot of different things you can do. I'm on a testosterone gel that I basically have to put on my arms and shoulders every day, which it kind of sucks, but the other option is needles, and I'm not a very good heroin addict, so that's just not going to work for me. There are downsides to that, too. The issue is that if you go on a testosterone, they call it hormone replacement therapy. If you go on a hormone replacement therapy for something that your body is supposed to regenerate on its own, the issue that you can run into is that your body stops producing it because you have it. So you end up in this downward spiral where you almost need to take more of it in order to kind of maintain where you were. When I first started on it, obviously you could see what happened. And like I said, I think statistics like that are very, very difficult to come by. But since that time, if I don't take it for a day, I notice it, but not nearly as much as I probably would have like the second or third day. And I brought that, I'll be honest, I brought a lot of that stuff up partially because of Gregg's talk at the Business of Software, and I think that mental health is not something that's talked about because people tend to look down on it. It's like, well, you know, you can't think clearly or you're stressed out. Just power through that stuff. And it's like, it just doesn't work. You know, there's times where it falls apart. That entire system falls apart. You can't force yourself to do something that your body and the chemicals in your body are telling you, no, I'm just not able to do that. And I thought that it was a good topic to bring up as something as a discussion because I think that here at MicroConf, we're very open with a lot of stuff. Financials, numbers, everything. And I think that that's a topic of conversation that could probably be pretty beneficial to people because I think that stress levels in this room are probably sky high.
We have time for one more.
Yep. And if you have any other questions afterwards, just let me know.
Thanks, Mike. That was a good talk. The outsourcing of your signing authority and kind of the legal structures that go around that, how did you work up the trust to give that to a VA? And what do you have in place in case they get hit by a bus?
So it's not outsourced to my VA. The financial stuff is all outsourced to my bookkeeper. So I have a bookkeeper who manages my books on a monthly basis. Then I have a CPA who does the books at the end of the year. So there's, on a yearly basis, at the very least, my CPA is looking stuff over. But on a monthly basis, she's handling all of the day-to-day or weekly and monthly expenses and handling like my health insurance and dental and credit card payments and all that other stuff. I haven't gotten to quite to the point where I'm handing off all of my personal finances to her as well, but I will be doing that probably sometime this year. But what was the other part of the question? How do I get to the point where I trusted her? At some point, you got to take a leap of faith. It's what she does for a living. She's a bookkeeper. So it's almost like, I wouldn't say do you trust your lawyer, but do you trust your CPA to try and make good decisions for you? Now, don't get me wrong, there's definitely CPAs. I've heard horror stories where it's like, my CPA cost me $30,000 this year, and now I've got this credit with the government that I'm not going to get back for the next 10 years because it's only being taken off of my taxes. There are certainly horror stories out there. There's definitely things that can go wrong. Like I said, ask Eric if he's still getting paid. I'm sure he is, but I don't hear any complaints from anybody about things going wrong. And I do look at it at least on a cursory level. I looked at it much earlier on, much more deeply, but now I don't so much. And it's a process. It's not something where overnight you just hand it off to them. The first part, the way I started it off was having her help bring the books over from one accounting system to another so that I have visibility to it, she has visibility to it, I can give my CPA visibility to it, because before it was kind of all walled off because of QuickBooks. And now it's not so much. So it's just it's an iterative process. That trust does not come overnight. And there's other ways that you can kind of cheat with that as well. So, for example, the person who I have doing my books is also a student of my wife's Zumba class. So that does help with trust. But
thanks, Mike.
Thank you.